True. But meanwhile, you got you have a university that has a stadium over 100,000, and they're losing to much inferior opponents this year. Look at the schedule. I don't have it in front of me. I didn't think we talked about them. But with all where you were going with this, the Tennessee Volunteer have a pretty rich history. You know, Johnny Majors certainly did well with them. Philip Fulmer are two coaches that have had a nice history. But now all of a sudden, you botch on the Shiano hiring, and then you have to settle for another guy that really wasn't high on your list. And again, we see a trend with certain organizations that have had proud histories that have fallen on hard times for whatever reason, whether it's a athletic director or whatever, you know, general manager, owner, whatever. And nobody ever thought that would have happened. You know, but yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that the Redskins are a mess. I think I mentioned earlier to Ryan Skolrud that Cardale Jones had a nice year leading the Ohio State Buckeyes to a national championship. Everybody got excited about his arm and his limited body of work. Got drafted by the Buffalo Bills. He's moved around a little bit. But you can't sit there and go ahead and jump on a bandwagon that's so darn limited. Do you know what I mean? To think that you've got your hidden gem. You can't do it. Although sometimes the excitement level of that big old Polish rifle or rifle of an arm, you know what I mean, makes you wonder, wow, this guy can throw the downfield. We got some speedy wideouts. Why not take a shot at this guy?
Well, you're absolutely right on that, Scott, because I'm glad you brought up the Cardale Jones point there, because here's the thing that gets dismissed with him that I do also believe was dismissed with Dwayne Haskins a little there as well. These guys are coming from Urban Meyer and Ryan Day, but in particular Urban Meyer. You know, let's just go through a track list of the quarterbacks that Urban Meyer has helped put in the NFL. The guy who I would say who's actually been the most successful of those quarterbacks would be Alex Smith.
Right.
And he's had an up and down career. But let's remember at one point, everyone thought that Tim Tebow was going to be the next great quarterback, and that was absolutely not the case at all. Okay, we've seen Cardale Jones, as you brought up. Braxton Miller ends up transitioning to wide receiver. Okay, like, we've seen a lot of guys have success under the tenure of Urban Meyer, who are quarterbacks. I believe we're entering an era also in college football where we're going to start to see the similar things happening under Lincoln Riley at Oklahoma. Because, not to bring the Cleveland Browns into this, but I believe that I should, just on the point that we're making really quickly. Baker Mayfield has absolutely regressed this year.
Right.
And what we saw on Monday Night Football this past week was just absolutely abominable. And until he starts back working with Lincoln Riley, I don't think you're going to see that Baker Mayfield, who was the number one overall pick, again. Now, I say that to say that, you know, some guys are simply just products of the system.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe that's what Dwayne Haskins was at Ohio State. And until they get the right type of coaching mind in there, in Washington, that they are confident in, that can put the skill set and the intangibles behind this guy to help him grow and flourish into the quarterback he can be, you know, they're never going to have that situation resolved. Now, with that being said, let me touch on your Bill Callahan point, because I absolutely do believe Bill Callahan could be the next head coach of the Washington Redskins long term. Now, I say that to say this. I would not be against that. And the reason for it, I don't believe Bill Callahan was ever given another fair shake in the NFL after he was fired from the Oakland Raiders, an organization who he took over from John Gruden. And, you know, let's keep this in mind. Rich Gannon, late in his career, not in the prime of it, not at the start of it, but late in his career, was an NFL MVP and all-pro quarterback under the tutelage of Bill Callahan. Now, a lot of people give John Gruden credit for that as well. He didn't win that MVP until Bill Callahan was the sole head coach. And Bill Callahan was also the offensive mastermind who was calling the plays alongside John Gruden as well. This is a good football coach. And I'm not going to base his track record based on how things went in Oakland. That was a very old team that he was coaching out there, and he experienced that success out there with. I mean, my goodness, Jerry Rice is almost 40. Tim Brown, almost 40. Rich Gannon going on 40. So it was very soon that the wheels were going to start falling off out there because Al Davis was still stuck in his ways. He wasn't changing. He wasn't evolving with the rest of the league. He wasn't willing to get younger, and you saw that even after Bill Callahan left that organization, after he was fired, I should say.
Right.
You saw Al Davis bringing Warren Sapp past his prime, bringing all these other veterans past their prime. You saw this. So I don't feel Bill Callahan ever got that fair shake again, and I believe this could be his opportunity, and I believe that he could be the guy that could help Dwayne Haskins become an NFL starting quarterback. I truly do believe that. But Daniel Snyder is going to have to get out of the way. That's the first team that's going to have to happen. If you're going to own the team, you need to simply own the team. Everyone wants to be a Jerry Jones, it seems like, when they sit in that position, unless they're willing to be guys who are just like, I'm just going to own the team. I'm going to let the front office make the decisions. I'm going to let the coaching coach. I'm going to let the players play.
Okay, let me go.
Only Jerry Jones is that controversial owner I can see step in and have any type of success like that, who's going to be the general manager of the team, address the team, and do all these other things, and not actually let a head coach be a head coach.
Let me go a couple different directions here. Number one, okay, we'll talk about system quarterbacks way back in the day. Andre Ware came out of the University of Houston as a run-and-shoot guy, went to the Detroit Lions as they had a run-and-shoot team. Everybody thought he'd do well. The only thing that stopped Andre Ware was that stupid thing called a holdout. Back then, they didn't have a rookie wage scale. He got so far behind, and then he was third on the depth chart, turned out to be a bust. Number two, we'll talk about the Urban Meyer situation a little bit, producing quarterbacks. Tim Tebow did have at least a win in terms of the playoffs. That's as far as the compliments go. When Tim Tebow had a chance to find a team to play quarterback, he got sold by Rex Ryan to go to New York, was more concerned about the endorsements instead of playing quarterback. He should have gone to Jacksonville. That's number two. Number three, Bill Callahan, to me, should get the job. And I mentioned this with Ryan Skolwood earlier when we talked about Freddie Kitchens getting the job with Cleveland. Greg Williams should have gotten that job and not Kitchens. So I think that anytime you have an interim coach, you're giving him 11 games for an audition to see if he's worthy of the job. And I think that if Daniel Snyder has any brains, he does have Callahan. Now, let's talk about Jerry Jones for a moment, okay, Xavier? What has he done since Jimmy Johnson left? Don't sit here and tell me that Barry Switzer won a damn Super Bowl because it was Jimmy Johnson's team, that Barry Switzer should have gotten a Christmas gift, okay, should be mailing Jimmy Johnson a Christmas gift because he laid that team out for it, because he hadn't done nothing since. You see where all these little points are coming into play, Xavier McKnight?
Oh, yes.
Bang, 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 bang. And once upon a time in Washington, there was a team called the Washington Bullets. No, I'm not trying to assume anything about gun control, but those are bullet points that I'm trying to make to validate what we're both discussing tonight. Questions or comments about that? Bill?
No, I definitely agree with you on all of that. I definitely do. And, let's go back to the Bill Callahan point there for a second, because, I just believe that, everyone needs to understand the history of, where he came from with that Oakland Raiders organization there for a second. It's very hard to play quarterback in the NFL enough as it is anyway. It's even harder to be a successful NFL quarterback. You really have to put in the work, you have to have some intangibles, and you have to have some great fortune go on your side. But to go on to be one of the elite quarterbacks later on in your career, where you're nearing 40 years of age, and this is still during a time where quarterbacks really weren't even close to playing to 40 anyway, and you just see what Bill Callahan was able to do for Rich Gannon. If you hand him young studs like Dwayne Haskins, maybe even still Colt McCoy, possibly Case Keenum, I think you're handing him an intriguing trio of quarterbacks there. Now, I don't believe all three of those quarterbacks will be in the nation's capital after this season anyway, but it's a very interesting situation, and it's one I believe that he can have some fun with and really get some good results out of, because even though the Washington Redskins are 0-5, I'm not convinced that that's an 0-5 football team on paper. They have too much talent to be this bad right now.
Okay, 2 points I want to make. Number one, okay, let's just do some hypotheticals. Let's just say that Callahan gets a full-time job. Does he bring in Rich Gannon as his offensive coordinator? I could too. I could too. Point number two, when Bill O'Brien was at Penn State trying to clean up the Joe Paterno, Jerry Sandusky mess, he did, I thought, a pretty admirable job over there until he ended up taking the job with Houston. Bill Callahan had the job over at Nebraska, and the only thing he had working against him was Tom Osborne, who wanted a Nebraska man to take the job. Okay, you get the point. So I think Bill Callahan walked into a hornet's nest with Nebraska when they were mediocre. That gave him the opportunity to bring in Bo Pelini to go ahead and take over the job. And obviously, Bo Pelini had a decent career, but then, of course, the Nebraska situation's been a mess since. So, I guess my point is, I've always been a firm believer that Bill Callahan has always been a pro coach, as is Bill O'Brien, okay? And they walked into university situations, which are obviously two of the most winningest programs there, and they did okay, but I can definitely see that both of those two guys should be able to be coaching NFL teams. Of course, one would wonder how much longer O'Brien's situation will be after this year. But I will agree with you that I don't know if any of those three quarterbacks will be in the nation's capital next year anyways. Or at least maybe one of the three at the most. But that's an interesting dynamic that we'll have on future shows.
You have some good prospects. I don't want to call these college quarterbacks great quarterbacks coming out of school just yet. You have to come out and prove it on the pro level first for me to say that. You have some good potential prospects who are coming out. And it really depends on how this team finishes. It depends on how, if Dwayne Haskins does get back in there, how he looks to end the season. You can't go out there and look like he did against the New York Giants. That was absolutely putrid. That was an awful performance. Let's just call that as it is. But this is a quarterback's league now. And you win based on, how elite is your quarterback. You have to have great defense, and you have to have great complementary pieces as well, but this is a quarterback's league. You go as far as your quarterback takes you. If Bill Callahan doesn't get the job in Washington, I'll say it right here, right now, Scott, I wouldn't mind seeing him replace Dan Quinn in Atlanta. I wouldn't mind seeing Jay Gruden replace Dan Quinn in Atlanta.
I knew you were
seeing these things happen.
I knew you were going there, too. I knew it. I was waiting for you to bring it up because I was going to mention it. Yeah, Jay Gruden, I think, well, there's no question he'll land someplace else. And then I have to wonder about how much longer Dan Quinn's going to be there. And, of course, the downfall of that organization was attributed to the fact that once Kyle Shanahan left, I think Quinn was in trouble. But I'm glad you brought those up. And what's been fun about this program here tonight is you and I have gone all over the place with it using one hypothetical after another. And I think that when you connect the dots and we go ahead and play it to the rest of the listeners, I think anybody should learn different points about what we brought up. And it will definitely shed a lot of light on some things that could be taking place a few weeks from now. So any final comments, Xavier McKnight, here on the Real and the Rare?
Well, here's what I'll say right now. I said this on the Sports Exchange right now, and I'll say it here, why I bring up Bill Callahan or Jay Gruden potentially to Atlanta. Matt Ryan is your franchise quarterback. This is who you have built your team on the backs of. And Matt Ryan's not an elite quarterback to me, but he's also not one of the awful quarterbacks to me. He's a little above the grain. But we've seen what happens when you put a great offensive mind with him. We saw what happened when they put Kyle Shanahan with him, and the second year they clicked. He was the league MVP. They led that team to the Super Bowl. And, of course, we know about the 28-3 disaster that took place. We won't harp on that. But I'm just saying, you see the success that you can have there. These are protégés that we're looking at right now in Washington. If we were to hand Jay Gruden or Bill Callahan a short thing that's already had some level of success, who knows? Maybe they could go on to win a Super Bowl or to take teams far in the playoffs with a Matt Ryan if that was their quarterback.
Well,
who knows what we would see right there?
Well, I guess at a time when Atlanta sports has more questions than it has answers, because now that the Braves are out and the Falcons are in trouble, and you don't have the Thrashers to kick around because they're not there, okay, and then you have the Hawks, it's tough to be in Georgia, that's for sure. But meanwhile, I think this was a great show, don't you, Xavier McKnight?
Oh, yes, and it's only going to continue to get better.
Very good. All right, so on behalf of Xavier McKnight, my name is Scott Morganroth for The Real and the Rare, and you are listening to the South Florida Tribune Broadcasting Network.